From exposure to Mother Nature and all her elements, all the way to human error, strap on your harnesses and double tie those knots. We are heading up to the summit today, but it won't be an easy ride as we cover the top 10 horrifying things people came across while mountain climbing. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have avalanches. Avalanches are a huge risk for climbers everywhere because they are huge, powerful, and you really can't control them. For just one example of how horrifying avalanches can be, we can look to the Dyatlov Pass incident. In February of 1959, 9 young Soviet hikers headed out on a trek through the Ural Mountains. They were having a successful time and managed to set up camp, but in the middle of the night something happened that made them cut their way out of the tent, leave all their belongings behind, and leave their site in clothing that was not suitable for the bitter cold. In the end, 6 of them ended up passing away from hypothermia, while the last 3 hikers were found passed away with signs of severe trauma. For half a century, what happened to these hikers remained a mystery and a case people were trying their best to solve. In 2019, the case was officially reopened, and just last year they finally came to the conclusion that the reason these 9 people fled their tent in a rush and what ultimately caused their death was an avalanche. It was an absolutely tragic scenario, but it's one that really represents the danger avalanches present. In our number 9 spot today, we have broken bones. Sometimes when you're out there in the wilderness, things happen and stuff starts to go sideways. The risk of injury can be great, and some are of course worse than others. Doug Scott is a man who has one of the most interesting mountain climbing stories I've ever heard, and it's almost unbelievable. Doug was descending Baintha Brack, also known as the Ogre, when he broke both of his legs. This is obviously a huge issue when trying to climb a mountain, but Doug was simply just built different. This man crawled on his hands and knees for days, and somehow, through sheer willpower, he managed to make it down off the mountain alive. Like, in full perfect health, I probably couldn't have done it, and this guy did it with 2 broken legs. That's unbelievable. To make it even more unreal, when talking about how he managed to stay alive, Doug said, quote, "It was no problem because I'd only broken both tibia. If I'd broken my femur, then I've no doubt I'd still be on the mountain." Well, Doug, thank God it was only your tibia. In our number 8 spot today, we have Rainbow Valley Everest. The moment Mount Everest was confirmed as the highest mountain peak in the world, both amateur and pro climbers alike from all over the world have been dying to summit the mountain. While this is one of the highest trafficked mountains, there is an area on it that not many people know about. Despite Rainbow Valley sounding like a beautiful, wondrous place, it is actually the area of the mountain that is above 800 meters high. The reason this area is so horrifying is that this is where the bodies of many of those who have failed the expedition lie. Some of these bodies have been here for decades because it is extremely difficult, risky, and costly to have them rescued. It really is a life-threatening job for those who are tasked with the rescue mission, so they should of course be paid accordingly. The rainbow name comes from the colors that can be seen up here, whether it's the colors of the jackets, the equipment, or the garbage left over from these expeditions. The reason why this is the area where most of the deaths occur is because of extreme weather, avalanches, and exhaustion from continuous climbing. The reason rescue is so difficult is because helicopters cannot reach this area, as they can only safely reach an altitude of up to 8,000 meters. This means that the people have to head all the way up and then carry the body down, which is not an easy task by any stretch. The local guides on Everest then have to take this responsibility on, but unless you're ready to spend $70,000 to $200,000 US dollars, this isn't exactly an option. In our number 7 spot today, we have falling rock. Because of things like erosion and temperature change, when climbing, sometimes large chunks of rock will come loose. This presents a ton of problems, and one of the main ones is of course if you find yourself in a situation where you're below one of these rocks. As an example of how quickly things can turn, we can look at the story of Kieran Cunningham, who was climbing with 2 friends when boulders started basically raining down on them. Kieran described the incident by saying, quote, "I was leading and got up to the 3rd pitch and was pulling my partners up beside me and got one up while the other was about 50 meters below us on the rope. We heard a scream from below and we looked up and there was a shower of rocks flying over our head, and at this point they were maybe the size of your head or a briefcase or something. I was already scared at that point as they were heading in the direction of my climbing partner Rosa, who was down below." After this, he said that a huge rock the size of a car came flying over top of them and was heading right down in Rosa's direction. It was all happening so fast and no one really had had a chance to even think of what to do. Rosa managed to jump out of the way and take cover behind some other rocks, and the large car-sized one just cleared her head. If she was any taller, things would have been disastrous. Luckily, all three of them escaped this horrifying scenario without any serious injuries, but this tale really shows just how quickly things can go awry when climbing. In our number 6 spot today, we have snow blindness. This is a fairly common thing that happens to inexperienced climbers who aren't equipped with the proper gear and the proper eye protection. Basically, it's kind of like a sunburn, but for your eyes. Snow and ice are super reflective, so when it's surrounding you, the UV rays bouncing off of it are really strong, so if you aren't protecting your eyes well enough, it can cause a burn. As I'm sure we'd all expect, it's super painful and can impair your vision, and considering all of the risks associated with mountain climbing, that is a huge issue. The symptoms of snow blindness can set in hours or even up to a full day after exposure, and a few days of rest will be required to heal, just like a regular skin sunburn. While it certainly isn't the worst thing that can happen on this list, spending too much time in the sun without the proper eye protection can definitely cause some more serious problems. It's the only place on Earth where people step over corpses to achieve their dream. More than 200 climbers have died on Mount Everest, and most of them are still there. Above 8,000 meters lies the death zone, where oxygen levels are so low your body slowly shuts down. Recovering a body from this altitude is nearly impossible, so many climbers remain exactly where they fell. The area known as Rainbow Valley is filled with bright colored parkas and boots, now frozen to lifeless bodies. Some, like green boots, have become grim landmarks. New climbers use them as reference points, never knowing the full story of the person lying beneath the snow. A mountaineer stumbled across a treasure chest frozen beside human remains. In 2013, a climber on Mont Blanc saw a small metal box poking out of glacier ice. Inside was something he never expected. A collection of emeralds, sapphires, and rubies still sparkling after decades in the cold. The treasure was traced back to Air India Flight 101, which crashed into the mountain in 1966. Many of the passengers and their belongings were never recovered. The gems were valued at around $300,000, and local authorities praised the climber for turning them in, but they also reminded the public that mountain still holds human remains, and not everything lost has been found. If you found a treasure chest with $300,000 worth of jewels, would you turn it in or would you keep it? That's my ethical question for the comments today. Let's discuss. Scientists expected ice. They didn't expect 15,000-year-old viruses. At an altitude of 6,000 meters in Tibet, researchers drilled deep core samples to study ancient climate data. What they found was a hidden ecosystem of viruses, 33 of them to be exact, and 28 had never been seen before. These viruses had been frozen for over 15,000 years, completely sealed off from the world. Scientists worry that as glaciers continue to melt, ancient pathogens could be released into the modern environment, ones our immune systems have never encountered. It is definitely not science fiction, it's actually already happening. Locals say the mountain screams at night, and they might be right. On the slopes of Mount Elgon, an extinct volcano on the Uganda-Kenyan border, lies a cave with a disturbing reputation. This cave has been the source of eerie, unexplained noises for generations, wailing sounds echoing from deep within the cave. But what's scarier is what's been found here, evidence of deadly viruses. The cave is one of the suspected birthplaces of Marburg virus, a cousin of Ebola, and in the 1980s, researchers who entered the cave were later infected with the virus, some dying within just days. The mountain may not just be screaming, it might be warning us.
This is the Bindeshwar Mahadev Temple, also called Binsar Temple. It's way up in the mountains of northern India, around 8,200 feet above sea level. It's dedicated to Shiva, but no one really knows who built it or when exactly it was made. Some people say it goes back to the 9th or 10th centuries, others think it's even older. The whole thing is carved out of stone, and there's no sign of any complex tools or equipment having been used. There are no detailed records either, no construction plans, it just sort of exists out in the forest. The inside still has stone idols of Shiva and other deities, and locals still use it for festivals and religious events. Once a year there's a festival where people bring lamps and offerings. It's also in a remote spot surrounded by thick forest and barely marked, so it doesn't get a lot of tourists. It was actually torn down and rebuilt in 2017, but they tried to stay true to the original layout. Still, nobody really knows how the original was built in the first place or why it was built so far from everything. This is Akyum. It's one of the oldest temples ever found in Cambodia. It was built sometime in the 700s near what would later become Angkor, the area famous for Angkor Wat. Long before that empire showed up, Akyum was already experimenting with what's called a temple mountain layout, basically a pyramid-shaped temple meant to represent a sacred mountain. What makes it even more interesting is that part of it was actually carved into a natural hill, and underneath there's this underground chamber. That's not something you see at other temples in the region. Most just sit flat on the ground, but this one was built into the earth. No one really knows what the chamber was used for, but it's completely unique. Over time, the temple got buried under layers of earth, and parts of it were covered up completely when a giant man-made reservoir was built nearby hundreds of years later. This is a Taoist temple called Taijie Temple, sitting about halfway up Mount Taibai in central China. The current version of the temple was rebuilt in modern times, but the original version has been around in some form since at least the Han Dynasty, which was over 1500 years ago. What's strange is where it was built, right into the mountainside, around 5,000 feet above sea level. Pilgrims used to hike the mountain and stop here to rest and pray before heading higher. The mountain itself is considered sacred. The mountain itself is also considered sacred, and this spot marks a kind of spiritual checkpoint along the way. There's no clear record of how the original version was built into the rock. There are steps carved straight into the mountain and parts of the old foundation that suggest they cut directly into the stone. Whoever built it had to carry everything by hand up steep, dangerous terrain too. This one's a more recent discovery. Palaspata is a 1,000-year-old stone temple built by the Tiwanaku civilization high up in the Andes near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. Archaeologists found it not that long ago using drones and satellite scans. It had been sitting unnoticed on a mountain ridge about 13,000 feet above sea level. It's a solid example of how much we still don't know about these ancient cultures. The temple is made up of about 15 rooms. And what's interesting is where it's located, right where three different regions came together: mountain highlands, grazing land, and farming valleys. So it's probably used for trade. They also think it was used for rituals tied to the sun and the farming seasons, but obviously at some point the place was abandoned and forgotten, and it sat there for centuries, slowly getting buried and overgrown, until we finally spotted it from the air, of course. Mesa Verde, Colorado is home to some of the most impressive rock-cut buildings in the United States, and Cliff Palace is the biggest of the bunch. It was built by the ancestral Puebloans around 800 years ago, right into the side of a massive cliff. They didn't have metal tools, they didn't use wheels, they still managed to carve this out. There are about 150 rooms, along with a bunch of ceremonial chambers called kivas. The location is just crazy. The whole thing sits under a huge overhang, so it's protected from wind, rain, and snow. You can still see carved steps and handholds on the rock walls where people used to climb in and out. Some of the rooms are stacked up to 4 stories high, with small windows, storage areas, and fire pits inside. Everything was built using stone hammers, shaped sandstone, and mud mortar. This was the home of an entire community, though, carved right into a cliff with nothing but basic tools, and it's still standing. Well, let's start with some recent news from the Ural Mountains. April of 2024 saw record high flooding in Russia's Ural Mountains. Thousands of people needed to be evacuated. The flooding from melting snow was the highest it had been in decades. The Ural River, Europe's third longest, surged, breaching a dam near Orsk in the Orenburg region, leading to a state of emergency. Authorities issued urgent evacuation orders, with the mayor of Orenburg, Sergei Salman, stating that, quote, absolutely everyone who is in the flood zone needs to leave their homes. Do not delay the evacuation. The situation will only get worse in the next 2 days. And it did. Over 10,400 homes across Russia were flooded, severely affecting regions like the Urals, Siberia, Volga, and central areas. People were hiking neck deep in floodwater, and the streets were just completely submerged. Boats needed to be used for transportation.
Hikers turning up dead in the middle of the mountains is one thing, thing, but when they turn up dead and radioactive, it's a whole other thing. In February of 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers went up into the Ural Mountains to hike Dyatlov Pass. They never returned. When authorities went out to look for the missing men, they were greeted with a grisly scene. The first thing they came across was the hiker's tent, which appeared to have been ripped from the inside. Next, they found shoe prints, sock prints, and even bare footprints in the snow, leading away from the campsite where the hikers would have stayed. Considering the cold temperatures in the Ural Mountains in February, this was strange to say the least. Rescuers followed the prints to find the bodies of 2 of the missing men, and in the months that followed, the remaining 9 were also found. At first, it was assumed that the group had died of hypothermia, although why they would have stripped down in the freezing cold was beyond the scope of understanding. However, the theory was quickly disproved when an autopsy report showed that one of the 9 bodies had signs of blunt force, another had 3rd-degree burns, one had thrown up BLOOD, and one was straight up missing a tongue. Not to mention, many of the men's clothes were tested and confirmed to be literally radioactive. You wanna know how this happened? Me too, along with most of Russia. But unfortunately, for right now, we really have no way of knowing how these 9 hikers met their gruesome end in such an incredibly bizarre way.
One of the most jaw-dropping discoveries in the Ural Mountains are the megaliths, specifically the ones on Vera Island. They date back to the Neolithic period around 5000 to 3300 BC. You have megalith number 1, megalith number 2, number 3, Vera Island 9, and Vera Island 4. Megalith number 1, though, is the biggest, measuring a hefty 52.5 by 29.5 feet, carved right into the bedrock and capped with massive stones. And it's got a pretty impressive layout. It's a long entrance, a central hall, 2 chambers, a connecting corridor. There are windows and sculptures featuring bulls and wolves. As for what it was built for, a lot of archaeologists think it might have been a temple back in the day. No one really knows who built these megaliths, how they managed it, and exactly what they were for. They stretch across a vast area too, which means different groups might have built them for different reasons. Like, sure, megalith number 1 seems like it may have been used for religious practices, but the others don't show a lot, if any, signs of being used for worship or rituals. So, pretty puzzling.
What's better than 2.5 men? 7 strong men. Massive megaliths surrounding the northern side of the Ural Mountains, known as one of the 7 wonders of Russia. The structures are massive, measuring in at over 30 to 42 meters, 137 feet. They are top-heavy and extremely confusing because it appears as though these 7 gigantic structures quite literally defy the laws of physics, which of course begs the question of how these upright structures were erected in the first place. There are 2 explanations, and while one is not exactly scientific, I will share it with you anyways. Locals in the area believe that 6 Samoyed giants living in ancient times were traveling through the mountains in an effort to reach Siberia, so that they could fight and destroy the Mansi people. However, while making their way across the landscape, they ran into a shaman who turned them to stone. The same shaman was later turned into a stone himself. If you look at the formation, you will notice that 6 of these strong men are huddled together, while the 7th sits apart facing them. It is believed that the 7th stone is the shaman watching over the giants. Scientists, on the other hand, believe something else. That 2 million years ago there were high mountains where the stone pillars now stand, and that over the years the soft rock of the mountains was destroyed, leaving behind the massive pillars. But that's no fun.
It looked like just a piece of scrap metal sticking out of the snow, but it ended a decades-long mystery. In 2001, a hiker navigating the Cowlitz Glacier on Mount Rainier spotted something strange, what looked like twisted metal jutting from the ice. Park rangers were called in, and what they found was chilling. It was the wreckage of a Piper aircraft that had vanished in 1972 along with 3 businessmen on board. For 29 years, their families had no answers. The glacier had hidden the wreck, preserving their remains and parts of the plane, and finally the mountain gave them back. It was like time had frozen at the moment of impact. When climbers reached the summit, they didn't expect to see a face staring back, frozen solid in the ice. In 2015, on Pico de Orizaba, Mexico's tallest volcano, mountaineers stumbled upon 2 bodies near the summit, perfectly preserved in the ice. Later, a third was found. The mummies still wore climbing gear, their faces locked in expressions of fear or pain. They were believed to be victims of a 1959 expedition that was caught in an avalanche. For decades, the mountain kept them hidden. Locals who helped recover the remains said it was like finding people frozen in the exact moment they died. You could still see the skin, the clothing, the story carved in ice. 6 hikers died in one of the strangest, most disturbing mountain deaths in modern history, and no one can explain why. In the Kamar-Daban range of southern Siberia, a group of 7 hikers set out into the wilderness. Only one returned. When rescuers found the others, the scene was terrifying. Some of the dead had foam around their mouths, others were in their underwear, their bodies twisted and injured. The survivor said her friends suddenly began screaming and running as if something invisible had attacked them. Some theories blame hypothermia, others chemical weapons testing or a freak environmental reaction, but to this day the exact cause is still unknown and eerily similar to the Dyatlov Pass incident. For over half a century, mountain guides walked right over a missing airplane and never even knew it. In 1968, a small aircraft, a Piper Cherokee, crashed into the Swiss Alps, disappearing completely. Search teams combed the area but found nothing. Then in 2022, as glacial ice melted from a glacier due to rising temperatures, a twisted wreck suddenly appeared. Lodged in the ice was the aircraft's crumpled cockpit, frozen for 54 years, just meters below a popular mountaineering route. This reappearance was a shock to locals who had walked over it countless times. Even stranger, not all questions about the crash have been answered. They died in a war a century ago and are still surfacing fully dressed and hauntingly preserved. In the Italian Dolomites, the White War of World War I was fought at altitudes of over 3,000 meters. Entire units froze to death in avalanches or brutal cold. Now, as the glaciers melt, soldiers from both the Austro-Hungarian and Italian armies are re-emerging. Some still wear full uniforms. Some still have blonde hair. Shrapnel can be seen lodged in their bones. The bodies had been flash frozen by the ice for over 100 years, preserved better than anything in a museum. It is a haunting reminder of a war that was almost forgotten. At first, people thought it was a mass grave, then DNA revealed something even stranger. Rupkund Lake, also called Skeleton Lake, sits high in the Indian Himalayas. It's surrounded by steep cliffs and almost permanently covered in snow. In the 1940s, a British ranger found hundreds of human bones at the lake's edge, at least 500 individuals. But recent DNA analysis revealed the real twist. The dead came from 3 genetically distinct groups, and they died in different centuries. One group was from South Asia, one from the Eastern Mediterranean, and the third from Greece. No one knows why they were here, why they died together, or how their remains all ended up in the same icy lake.
First up, we have Huyen Kong Cave Pagoda in Vietnam. No, this is not the set of an Indiana Jones movie, this is a real place. It's carved right into the marble mountains near Da Nang, and when you walk inside, you're standing in this dark, echoey cave with a huge Buddha statue lit by a beam of sunlight coming down through a hole in the ceiling. It looks intentional, but it's natural. It's just how the rocks split over time. The cave's been used for all kinds of things over the centuries. Originally, the Cham people were here, so you'll see a mix of Hindu and Buddhist stuff. Later on, Vietnamese monks added statues, incense holders, and altars, but during the Vietnam War, the whole place was used as a Viet Cong hospital. There are still holes in the walls from shrapnel, and parts of the cave were widened by hand so wounded soldiers could be carried in. There's no sign that any big machinery was ever used here. The stairs and carvings were shaped straight into the stone with simple tools. No concrete, no reinforcement, they just worked with what the mountain gave them. And somehow they turned it into this incredible place that I am absolutely adding to my ever-growing list of places I really want to see with my own eyes. This is Kalisa Temple, the largest Hindu temple in the Ellora Caves in India. This temple wasn't built, it was carved. Instead of stacking stone or building walls, they started at the top of a mountain and chiseled their way down, turning a solid chunk of rock into what you see here. It was made in the 8th century, and around 200,000 tons of rock had to be removed. They dug out courtyards, tunnels, columns, shrines, statues, all from the inside out. And they did it using nothing more than iron chisels and other basic hand tools. There are elephant statues at the base that look like they're holding up the structure. The inside has carvings from Hindu epics, perfectly straight pillars, staircases, and huge open spaces with crazy high ceilings. There are even parts that look like they were built with individual pieces, but they weren't. It's all the same mountain. No one really knows how long it took. Some say 20 years with thousands of workers, but even that seems way too fast for something this intricate. And just imagine if they messed up one section, they couldn't fix it. So this would have taken an incredible amount of skill. Even today, people have no clue how they pulled it off with the limited tools they had. These are the Mysore temples, sitting on a rocky hill in northern India. They were carved right into the mountain sometime in the 8th century, and the whole place is made of a single piece of stone. That means no bricks, no stacked stones. Everything you see was chiseled out of one giant rock. The design follows something called the Nagara style, which is just a traditional northern Indian way of laying out temples. The central part is usually tall and shaped like a tower, and the temple is supposed to mirror the universe, so it's all super symmetrical and symbolic. Even the little details, like where the pond goes, has meaning. There's a man-made pond right in front of it that reflects the whole thing like a mirror when it rains. It's really pretty, but it looks unfinished as well. There are parts where the carving just stops, like they walked off the job mid-project. Nobody really knows why. Could have been abandoned because of an earthquake or maybe a war. Some carvings are really detailed, others look like they barely started. No sign of advanced tools here either, just basic hand chisels. Lalibela, Ethiopia has some of the most mind-blowing ancient architecture on the planet. There are 11 churches there that were carved straight into the ground. Workers carved down into solid volcanic rock to make these things, and they were made in the 12th and 13th centuries under a king named Lalibela, who wanted to create a new holy city so people wouldn't have to travel all the way to Jerusalem. The most famous of the churches is the Church of St. George, which was dug into the ground and shaped like a perfect cross. From the surface, it looks like the top of a regular building, but when you walk up, you realize the entire church is down inside a giant pit. They didn't just carve the outsides, they carved rooms, columns, doors, windows, altars, and there are tunnels connecting the churches, all from the same rock. And they did this with primitive tools. They didn't use explosives, there were no big machines, people just chipped away at it for decades. And yes, these churches are still in use today. People still go there to pray, and during major religious holidays, thousands of people make pilgrimages, some walking barefoot for days to get there. Let's switch to Japan. Ominisen-ji Temple sits near the top of Mount Omine. It was first built in the late 600s, and it's still part of a religious path that monks and pilgrims hike every year. The main hall is set into the side of the mountain itself, not just next to it, actually into the rock. The religion tied to this place is called Shugendo. It's a mix of old Buddhist and Shinto beliefs, and the whole idea is to go through harsh mountain training to reach spiritual power. So getting to this temple is not easy. It's a challenge, physically and mentally. The current building was rebuilt in the 1600s, but it's still based on the original design, and the location hasn't changed. There's not a lot of info about how the first version was carved into the rock or who exactly did it, and because it's so high up and isolated, it doesn't seem like the kind of place you'd build unless it was seriously important. One thing worth mentioning for all the women in the audience, it is still banned for you to go to the temple. It's part of an old rule that dates back over 1,000 years, and it's still enforced today. So not only is this place very old, it still adheres to rules written in a very different time. So the Dyatlov Pass incident gets talked about a lot, as Hannah just did, and for good reason. It's one of the most terrifying mysteries in history, but there's another creepy theory that maybe it wasn't some toxic chemical the group was exposed to that caused them to tear each other apart. It wasn't an avalanche, it was a large beast that was responsible for the deaths of the hikers. the Yeti. At least he could have been involved in addition to the toxic stuff. This image here is said to be one of the last photos taken by the group. Is this just one of the hikers? Or is this someone or something that was stalking them? Just for a little context, back in 1959, a group of 9 hikers mysteriously died in the Ural Mountains. They were found in strange circumstances, their tents torn up on the inside, some were found nearly naked in the freezing cold. They looked like they died violently. As Hannah said, one was even missing a tongue. The scene looked like something completely savage had ransacked their campsite. So I don't know, I find the avalanche theory pretty weak given the state these poor people were in. Everything just points to something more deliberate, and it's not like there have never been reports of a hairy Bigfoot looking creature in those parts, so I don't know. Could be possible.
Ancient technology from hundreds of thousands of years ago, coupled with fireballs lighting up the sky and cigar-shaped UFOs, make for a pretty complex mystery, and of course some pretty good content for extraterrestrial enthusiasts. In 1991, geologists exploring the Ural Mountains discovered some pretty interesting nanostructures after digging 30 feet down into the earth. Minuscule metal coils and springs were extracted from soil that had remained untouched for centuries prior, leading scientists to wonder, where the hell did they come from? I mean, some of the fragments are as small as 1/10,000th of an inch, and the incredibly precise shape of the fragments has led scientists to believe that they had to have been manufactured. Not only that, but the smallest pieces were tested to reveal that they had been made of tungsten, a metal used in spacecraft construction because of its ability to withstand high temperatures. Whether or not this discovery is proof of aliens is up for debate, but scientists are convinced that the nanostructures are proof of an incredibly advanced civilization living in the Ural Mountains in ancient times.
So not only have there been remains of mammoths found in the permafrost of the Urals, but sightings of living mammoths as well? Apparently there have been, and more than one. At least there have been reports of creatures over the years that look a lot like mammoths. Obviously these could be misidentifications or hoaxes, but there are more stories than you'd think. In 1920, a French diplomat shared a strange story he'd heard from a Russian fur trapper who claimed to have spotted giant shaggy elephants deep in the forest. One Russian explorer, Georgy Bashikrov, had an encounter that apparently haunted him forever. He'd been leading an expedition when he witnessed a massive reddish-brown creature with huge tusks waltz out of the forest, wade into a river, and then vanish. There are also stories of Soviet aircraft crews claiming to have spotted mammoth-like creatures from the sky in 1948. Then in 1978, geologists said they saw what looked to be a dozen mammoths calmly drinking from a river before disappearing into the woods. But what about solid evidence? Well, there were massive footprints found in Chukotka in 1948. They measured 27 inches wide and 20 inches long, way bigger than any known animal tracks in the area. They were found with trees smashed high above the ground, as if something mammoth-sized had passed through.
An abstract stone image carved into the grasslands of the Ural Mountains that might just predate the famous Nazca lines by thousands of years has led scientists to wonder why and also how. The shape appears to depict an elk with an elongated muzzle, 2 antlers and 4 legs, and possibly a tail. The animal is about 275 meters, 900 feet long, the equivalent of 2 American football fields. It also would have been visible to ancient tribes from a nearby ridge located north of the structure. At one time, the stones depicting the animal also would have appeared white and shiny, but their contrast has dampened over the years due to the fact that they are now covered with a thick layer of soil. Researchers believe the image is likely the product of the Ural's rich megalithic culture, as the mountains are literally littered with massive structures from the north all the way to the south. Investigations regarding the significance of the image, however, are still ongoing, so if we find out anything interesting, stay tuned for that.
One of the coolest caves in the Ural Mountains is Kapova. Not only are there cave paintings from the last ice age here, but the late Paleolithic era as well, when Cro-Magnons were walking the earth. And on top of that, bones from ancient animals were found in this massive cave. The place is basically a prehistoric art gallery or museum. There are images of mammoths, bison, rhinos, and the paintings are actually a lot less primitive than you'd think as well. There's attention to detail and storytelling here. Some scenes depict hunting, expeditions, and rituals, and archaeologists have, again, found ancient tools, jewelry, and bones of extinct animals like cave bears. I just can't imagine how incredible it would be to explore a place like this and just be fully immersed in the prehistoric ambience with paintings drawn on the cave walls by early humans who just had no concept of how far the human race would grow and evolve. Really cool.
Perhaps one of the most perplexing discoveries made in the Ural Mountains is the discovery of a massive pyramid, several times larger than the Egyptian pyramid of Cheops, found in the subpolar section of the Ural Mountains. The height of the pyramid is almost 800 meters, and it's clearly aligned with north, south, east, and west, with clear and clean 90-degree angles, leading scientists to conclude that the structure must be man-made. But the territory in which the pyramids were found were not places where ancient civilizations would have lived, but rather the area would have been used solely for ritualistic practices, making the find all the more fascinating and also incredibly mysterious, because I'm wondering, what were they worshipping? If we follow classic pyramid theories, it's probably aliens.
In our number 5 spot today, we have other climbers. Sometimes the most dangerous thing that can be found on a mountain is other climbers. It's like driving. You know you're paying attention and are in a good state of mind, but how are you supposed to know about all of the people around you? A perfect example of this comes from a story that someone posted online. They explained that they were on the 6th pitch with the lead climber going ahead to get to the next point, while the storyteller, who was pretty experienced, hung back with the other, far less experienced climber, waiting until the lead got to the next belay point. This is when a couple of other climbers decided to be impatient, and instead of waiting for them to do their thing, since they were ahead, these other 2 climbers began climbing straight through their gear and even removed 2 of their anchors in order to protect themselves. But in turn, this leaves our storyteller, his friend, and their lead all in extreme danger. If these impatient people were to fall, this would now pull the lead climber off, which will then most likely take the storyteller and the other climber along with them. Might I add that this is about 250 to 300 feet directly above sharp rocks. Other climbers also witnessed this, and at the end of the climb, everyone was sure to give those 2 a piece of their minds, because while everyone ended up being okay, this could have been a way different story with a way different ending. In our number 4 spot today, we have frostbite. One of the most unpredictable parts of mountaineering is the weather. Things can change on a dime, and it can be a super terrifying thing. One of the most devastating weathers to be caught in is of course extreme cold, which is not uncommon for the snowy mountainous peaks. There are a ton of risks that come along with the exposure to the elements, but one of the main ones is the risk of frostbite. An example of what frostbite can cost you can be seen in the story of the Mount Everest disaster, which took place on May 10th and 11th, 1996. There was a blizzard on the mountain which ended up stranding and taking the lives of 8 people who were trying to descend. One of the members of this team of climbers was named Beck, and he ended up suffering from snow blindness during the climb, which we are all now acquainted with. He actually fell into a hypothermic coma because it was so cold, and he suffered severe frostbite on his face, hands, and feet. Pretty miraculously, he not only survived, but ended up walking back down to camp in order to get help, where he was then taken by helicopter to receive treatment. He ended up needing his hands, parts of his feet, and even his nose amputated, but he did survive this whole ordeal, and that truly is the most important thing. In our number 3 spot today, we have human error. We are all humans, and with being human comes the realization that we all make mistakes. Like, a lot of them. It's a part of life. Sometimes, however, our mistakes can cost us more than other times, and that is why, when putting yourself in these sorts of situations, double and triple checking to avoid any kind of error, and taking what may seem like unnecessary steps might just be the key to saving your own life. One of the most famous double check mistakes is that of Lynn Hill in 1989. Lynn was an experienced climber at the time, and when she weighted the rope at the top of a warm-up climb, the unfinished knot at the end zipped right through her harness. illness. This caused her to fall 75 feet to the ground. Thankfully, she survived and was able to explain that she was distracted by conversation and forgot to finish her knot. She was also wearing a larger sweater at the time, which then covered up her error, of course only exacerbating the issue. Lynn of course didn't mean to make this mistake, and it was 100% an accident, but the implications could have been so much worse. 30 extra seconds to double check everything is way better than the months and months of recovery, if you're even lucky enough to get that. In our number 2 spot today we have a crevice. If you're unfamiliar, a crevice is basically just a deep open crack, and there are quite a few different kinds, but all of them can be quite hazardous without the proper awareness and training. One of the most well-known stories of the danger of crevices is that of Joe Simpson. One day while Joe was descending from the west side of Ciudad Grande, which is located in the Peruvian Andes, he ended up falling 150 feet into a crevice. Despite this far drop, he managed to survive, but now he had nowhere to go and he was stuck. He then went on to continue to rappel down because really, what else was he to do? Joe figured he was going to die, and actually at this point he was expecting it, but somehow he didn't. He miraculously found a way to get out, and then he also managed to somehow crawl a distance of 5 miles over the span of 3 days, and this landed him back at base camp where he could get the medical attention he needed. That is one of the most insane stories ever, and while this one thankfully has a happy ending, the same can't be said in a lot of these kinds of scenarios. In our number 1 spot today we have seracs. I've never heard of these things before because I've never climbed a mountain, but they are a block or column of glacial ice that are often formed by intersecting crevices on a glacier. They are usually around the size of a house, which is terrifying, and the reason they are so dangerous for mountaineers is because they can topple over with little to no warning. A perfect but horrifying example of how dangerous they can be is the 2014 Mount Everest ice avalanche. On April 18, 2014, seracs on the western part of Mount Everest failed, which then resulted in the deaths of 16 climbing Sherpas in the Khumbu icefall. This is actually the same icefall where the 1970 Mount Everest disaster took place, so clearly this area is highly dangerous. 13 bodies were recovered within 2 days, while the remaining 3 were never recovered due to the great danger of performing such an expedition. After this situation, many Sherpas were angry because the Nepalese government's compensation offer to the victims' families was considered quote meager, and they began threatening to strike or protest. On April 22nd of 2014, the Sherpas announced that they would not work on Everest for the remainder of the year as a mark of respect for those who had lost their lives.